Everyone, and welcome to a live recording of IDEO's Creative Confidence podcast, where we talk with creative leaders about innovation, leadership, and growth. I'm your host, Mina Seetharaman, the head of new ventures here at IDEO and also of the team here at IDEO U. As always, it's a delight to be here with all of you. And it's been a minute, actually. We didn't do a live stream, I don't think, in March. And I was talking with our writer, Rachel, and actually just thinking it's been a little while. And I'm not saying that we had nothing to do. It's been a busy time for sure. I feel like actually Mercury never comes out of retrograde, and I don't know if you all feel that way too. But is it a little weird for me to say that I've kind of missed this? So I'm glad to be here with all of you this month. Um, I know that some of you are longtime kind of audience members with us, and I see you've already, you know the drill, you're doing it right now. If you haven't done it already, definitely put hello from the moon, put your name and where you're coming to us from today into the chat because we love to see it. I see folks here from Panama, from New Brunswick, Canada, from Toronto. We have a really big Canadian contingent. I kind of love that. So, someone from Long Island, New York, Hyderabad, India. I really love this. I cannot convey enough to you. I know I say it every episode, but I cannot convey enough to you how much it means to us, how so many of you from all over the world give your time to us. We're really super grateful for it. As usual, I'm coming to you today from my home office here in the Hudson Valley in New York State. And our guest, Hannah Rosenfeld, I'm pretty sure you can't see her. You'll see her in a second. But I'm pretty sure I even know the room she's coming to us from, right, Hannah? Where are you today?
I am at IDEO Studio in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah, and I think is that the Shirley Chisholm room? I
It
feel
is
like
the
I've
Shirley
been
Chisholm room. Each of our phone booths are themed after something that was invented in Boston, and Shirley Chisholm worked here in Cambridge and did a lot of work on bees, which is why it's yellow.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I actually filmed a podcast there once, so it's nice to see you.
good to see you too.
So today we're going to be talking with Hannah about how AI is changing what's possible in research. We'll share how to use it in a way that actually leads to better understanding and clearer direction, not just faster outputs, which is a little bit of a theme for us here at IDEOU. And Hannah has a simple framework for how to think about the pros and the cons and the use cases for how to apply AI intentionally in your research work. But before we get into all of that, I do want to give you a little bit of a background on Hannah. At IDEO, she leads complex design programs and guides interdisciplinary teams in tackling big, ambiguous questions with a focus on designing for healthcare. Her work blends design research, strategy, and storytelling to help organizations uncover human insights and turn them into meaningful products, services, and experiences that reimagine how healthcare is delivered and experienced. She leads IDEO Cambridge's Research and Insight cohort and contributes to IDEO's Design Futuring practice, where she explores how emerging technologies like AI really kind of expand what's possible in research. She earned her master's in designing for interactions from Carnegie Mellon University, which has shaped her unique design-led and systems-focused approach to research. So we're super excited to have her here today. But before we actually dive into the conversation, we'd love to get a kind of quick sense of where everybody is coming from in relationship to leveraging AI in their work. So we're going to put up a simple yes no poll and then ask a few follow-up questions based on that poll. It's just a quick Zoom poll. So you might be using AI already in your work. Experimenting, maybe you're a little bit skeptical, no judgment here. Like, we actually hold tension for all of those things. That's all helpful context for today's conversation. So first question, just a yes, no. Are you using AI in your research process right now? Just pick one of the two. And then once you've answered that, if you're not using AI in your research process, feel free to drop it into the chat. What's holding you back? Why aren't you doing that? So we'd love to see the answers there too. I'm always fascinated to see what people pick. I like Enterprise Agita. Oh, some interesting things here. This is really interesting. Sorry, I'm taking notes as we go, and that's why this is moving a little slowly. And if you are using it, this is our third question. How do you use it now? This is really cool. Analysis and synthesis. Prototyping. Oh, we have a course for you. Oh, I like that one. Research, sense checking my ideas and launching a discussion. There's some really interesting ones here. Now, I'm going to ask another question that's a little bit different. Whether you use it or whether you don't, what's something that you wish you could be doing with AI that maybe you're not doing right now? Mm. Yeah, this is interesting. Making money. A lot of commentary on graphics, actually. Great. Gosh, thank you all so much. This is super helpful. And going by very quickly, I feel like I need to become a quicker writer. So Hannah, as you've been looking at some of these, I feel like there's some really interesting themes coming up from everybody.
Yeah.
What are you noticing in particular?
Well, I saw someone say lack of a framework, which just I'm super excited about because that's the basis of a lot of what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Hallucinations, sort of caution in the quality of content. Someone said, I like to think with my brain. We're going to talk a little bit about how you might use AI to do better thinking with your brain. Bias and ethics came up, and bias is a nuanced point that we'll make a little bit today and is a really core topic to the course. And then synthesis and prototyping, obviously really core to the design research process, and we'll share a little bit of a perspective on how and where AI can support both of those things. So excited to see a lot of our thinking reflected in people's responses, but also just validating the complexity of it, and people are really reflecting that complexity in their responses.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's some other things I thought were interesting too. Somebody had written down sycophancy. I often tell the models to turn that off because I want it to push back on my ideas. A lot of the time, like, needed to poke holes in them. Or somebody was saying, I want to identify edge cases versus obvious cases. I thought that was really interesting. And better graphics and diagrams. We'll talk more about tools and stuff later on, especially with your colleague, Angela. But, one of the things that I found is not all tools are created equal, right? Like I found not. I really have to explore, because some of them are great with diagrams and some of them are just terrible with diagrams.
Totally.
And so that experimentation can be super helpful, I think.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that we'll talk about today is having clarity around the mode that you're engaging AI in helps you understand how to prompt it to avoid things like that when that is important, or reframe things if that is the goal. So
yeah, absolutely. So, I think this whole discussion is really framing up where a lot of teams are challenged right now, right? They're really struggling to figure out where AI fits into their process. There's some uncertainty about where it really belongs. And so I think that's part of the reason that we've been working on this new course with you, to help give people some of that clarity. So at a high level, how do you think about the role of AI and the role it should play in research today?
Yeah. AI is in many ways expanding what research can be, but that also means that it's shifting our role as researchers within it. If we use it intentionally, AI, I believe, can help us see more, go deeper, and think differently.
Yeah.
But much of the conversation focuses on efficiency and moving faster. So I think a lot about a more interesting question being, what can we do now with AI that we couldn't do before?
Yeah.
The philosophies and principles of design research aren't changing, but the speed and scale of AI do allow us to ask bigger questions, to take in more context, to engage with complexity in wholly new ways. But it's hard to do that because how we deploy AI intentionally is both an operational question, like where in a process does AI fit? Where is it most meaningful? And it's also a philosophical one, which we saw reflected in a lot of the chat responses, which is what is appropriate for AI to be doing versus a human to be doing? And what does that mean for research as a practice and as a profession? And that last one is quite the doozy of a question. It's pretty overwhelming. But I think the silver lining for me is from where I'm sitting, the good news for all of you researchers is that the skills of research don't become less important in the age of AI. They actually become more important. Skills like framing good problems, asking good questions, making implicit things explicit so that they can be worked with. I think it's also really exciting that we are, as researchers, working at a very historical moment. And we have an incredible privilege and maybe an overwhelming responsibility too, sure, to write the rules, to build the playbook that defines how AI should be used in research, where it truly adds value and where it doesn't.
Yeah, I think those are really amazing points. And I apologize. I'm actually a little under the weather. And so I just had to go on mute and cough for like 2 minutes. Excuse me. So my voice is going to be kind of off for most of this. I really apologize for that. But I think you were echoing some of the sentiments that were coming up in the chat, actually, which is like faster, not better is a problem, right? And I think this idea of intentionality really kind of the provocation of what do we think of in terms of how we can shape this role, not just that AI plays, but actually the rules of the game. Like, how do we, what does it mean to be a researcher now? And how can we reshape that role as a researcher and the value that it brings to a project? To me, that's actually one of the most interesting things that I think most companies and most disciplines are missing, mostly because everybody's just in this race for speed.
And the conversation, the operational complexity is so much that it dominates a lot of the discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's actually talk about this framework, because I think that it helps a lot with not just how you've thought about it, but I think it could really help others to think about sort of this intentionality that we've been talking about. You've developed this way of thinking about it, not just when to use it and when not to, which is like one binary way of looking at it, but that really taking that much more intentional approach. So can you start to kind of walk us through this framework that you use to decide where it adds value in the process?
Yeah. So the first caveat I'll make is that I think in frameworks. So the framework here is very much a prototype of my thinking. So there are words that we're going to use in it. It's sort of defined in a very specific way because it is how I am thinking about this in conversation with my brilliant colleagues at IDEO, of which include my co-instructor, Angela Kachowska, who you will all meet in a week. But it is a living, breathing framework. So I just say that because I want all of us as researchers to be in dialogue with frameworks such as this. But I'm going to take you on a little bit of a nerdy journey because this is how my brain works. And my brain works in frameworks because I think they're a great way to grapple with complexity, and this is certainly complexity that feels worthy of a framework. And this thinking is rooted in the idea of an affordance, which is a term in the design world that describes the characteristics or properties of an object that suggest how it's to be used. And so because I wanted to ground this thinking in possibility rather than prescription, I was inspired by the question, what new things might AI afford for research, and what are the affordances of AI that make that possible? So after a lot of conversation, brainstorming, debate, being in conversation with my colleagues, we landed on sort of two fundamental things that AI affords. They're speed and scale. And it's actually the intersection of these two affordances that start to get to some interesting modes for using AI. So those become two axes of a framework. The first, speed access, is not just about leveraging AI's speed to go faster, but thinking about speed as a strategic dial. Are we using the generative capacities of AI to speed things up, Or are we using the reflective capacities of AI to make our work more thoughtful and deliberate? Acceleration is really about leveraging AI's efficiency. Deliberation, on the other hand, is about introducing meaningful friction into our process and doing so with intention. The second axis, scale, similarly isn't just about how big can we go, but how can we use AI in a mode that's fit for the scale of our inquiry? So are we using AI really to expand our capacity to take in information and broaden our exploratory capabilities? Or are we using AI more as an excavator to excavate and explore a defined space in new and different ways? So here, expand is about how abundantly we can frame our problem, right, while interrogate is about how deeply we can mine that abundance for meaning. And AI has a role to play on either end of that spectrum.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because we tend to look at things super one-dimensionally almost, right? Even among those two axes, we tend to think about speed as like just going fast.
Yeah.
And scale just as like just more. But actually, like, the expansiveness can take us very deep if we want to, and isn't just about sort of like skimming the top of everything. It can give you that sort of, depending on how you decide on those intersection points, that sense of deliberation and expansion coming together can be really interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's playing at that intersection that starts to unlock intentionality, right? So there are moments when big is what we want. And then, as most people here probably know, design loves constraint. There are moments where we actually need to carve meaning out of expanse. And we might be using AI in different modes to do each of those things.
So let's take a look at that first quadrant, actually. I love the kind of notion of widening your aperture. And I love how that first quadrant really kind of focuses in that space. Yeah. So what does that look like in practice? Like, where does AI help you to see more than you maybe could before?
Yeah. So another caveat here, I'm using the word mode to describe sort of what's happening at these intersections, because I have to give that a word. But if anyone in the audience has a better word to describe what these quadrants are, I am all ears. So in this mode, we're actually using AI to see more, to take in more, to make more data accessible, to make more information readily available, so that we can start to find and frame better problems. This is not to say that we're trying to stay in a continuous state of divergence. We have to constrain somewhere, but the expanse and speed of AI allows us to be more intentional about how and where we strategically converge, rather than letting operational limitations like time or money constrain or confine our research and design decisions. So thinking about the moments this might apply to a process, for those of you that are familiar with the popular double diamond design thinking framework, this is really about supercharging those moments of divergence. When you're trying to define a problem space for research, or you're trying to explore an opportunity space before defining a design strategy. In practice, that might look like using AI tools to compile desk research, to summarize documents, to generate decks or podcasts or frameworks to help you define an initial brief or problem. You might be using AI tools to translate documents so that you can integrate previously inaccessible material into your research. You might be cleaning up dissimilar data sets so that you can compare them. This is really about making more information accessible and available at that beginning, when you're really trying to take in information. And this is the quadrant that I think most people think about when they think about AI, right? Using AI speed and expansive scale to do more, to go bigger. And that's awesome. You know, I use it. Somebody in
the audience suggested, Christina's saying, like, it helps you to look under more rocks than you normally could.
Absolutely. And that's great. I use it like that all the time. But we've positioned it as just one mode in this framework because we can't live in this constant state of expanse, right? To do good design and to do good research, we have to converge. And the art here is how we use AI to go big and go wide intentionally, and then how we use it to engage more deeply with that complexity once we've found it, which is what happens as we move through some of these other quadrants.
Right. I think I think it's really interesting, and it's funny because somebody actually just said, but like widening the aperture can cause you to lose critical focus, and it's like,
Totally.
yeah, if you lived in that quadrant forever, you would just be swimming in a sea of like a billion, like 1,000 flowers blooming, and if you're not careful, those 1,000 flowers will wilt, right? Like it'll be
Absolutely.
really problematic.
And I think this also gets into some of the art of how we're using AI to do this, right? If you think,
Hmm.
again, to go back to that double diamond framework, the moments of divergence get smaller as we move through the process, right? The problem
Right.
space we're exploring becomes a solution space, becomes an implementation space. And how we frame that expanse defines how useful it is to support the scale and scope of the divergence that we need.
Right. No, I think that's really interesting. And I love how you framed up that quadrant. So let's talk a little bit then about quadrant two. To your point,
Mm-hmm.
one, very helpful, can't live there forever.
Right.
So the second quadrant is really actually about slowing down and
Yep.
noticing nuance, right? It
Yep.
is how AI can help you to go a little bit deeper, not just wider.
Yep.
And maybe like how you can do that when you're working with research. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this quadrant, as you'll see, it exists on the expand axis of scale because it really is about stretching your perspective, but doing so within a different mode, right? There's a different energetic character to the way that we're using expanse here. Here, we're thinking about AI as supercharging our ability to surface themes and patterns, to make new and interesting connections across and within that wide aperture that we framed.
Okay.
This is still about seeing more, right? But it's seeing deeper rather than seeing wider. And this is particularly helpful when we're trying to develop a point of view or make sense of a problem. You might think about engaging in this kind of mode in the research planning phase, right? So imagine like the point right before that first divergence, that first exploration moment. Here, AI might be helping you define the perspectives that you need to learn from, given the problem space that you've just explored in this expansive way. It might be helping you think of analogs or consider where you might look for inspiration. If that first quadrant was about widening our aperture as much as possible, here we're defining the shape of that first divergence. Where are the edges? Where are the interesting axes of it? This is also where we might start to say, how and where are we deploying constraint to craft a researchable, designable problem space, right? So we're doing a little bit of carving of that expansive aperture by slicing it in different ways, by having AI help us surface different interesting elements within it. This could also be a mode that you use in advance of a synthesis moment. Not to do synthesis, and I know this is something that came up in the chat. People are thinking about using it to do synthesis. I want to put a nuanced point here. I think meaning making is a human activity. And when we at IDEO use the term synthesis, we are really talking about that meaning making activity. And so I'm not suggesting that you're using AI to make meaning, but you might be using AI to analyze data, to visualize patterns, to generate initial frameworks, to scaffold your human synthesis process, and help frame up conversation or inquiry in that synthesis moment in a way that is either new, right? Give me a couple of different ways I might slice this data and think about synthesizing it, or just systematic, right? Or strategic. Help me be more efficient in my synthesis process by defining themes or creating buckets. I think chat-based tools are really interesting to use in this moment because here we're really talking about being in dialogue, either with our desk research or our qualitative or quantitative research. We really want, I think the idea of being in dialogue with research is interesting in this quadrant. So Maybe you create a custom agent that you train on your desk research and you can query it for thoughts on who should you recruit? What perspectives might be missing from your problem framing? What kinds of questions might you need to ask people? To prepare for synthesis, you might upload survey results or transcripts from your research, obviously with relevant data privacy and security measures in place, along with your initial research questions, and ask it to surface emergent themes or patterns or organize information into usable structures that can kickstart your research, your synthesis. You could also, because research is never done, it's an iterative process, you might even engage AI in this mode at the end of an initial round of research to prepare for a final readout or presentation, asking it to surface unanswered questions that could then start to seed a next phase of research for you. I think here the point is that AI here in this mode goes well beyond summarization. Like streamlining and summarizing can be useful, but they are not the goal. Here we're really looking for support in sense making. But on the other hand, I'm not suggesting that you outsource synthesis or human thinking to AI, because AI can certainly sharpen our thinking, but it doesn't replace it. So for the person that said, I like to think with my brain, so do I. And here we are really thinking about how we are using AI to set up our brains to do meaningful and meaty thinking, not outsourcing thinking to AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is sort of true in many facets. Research is one, but I think that a lot of times I sort of find that the answers I'll get back when I'm sort of playing out, I'm in dialogue with something, and when playing it back, it's giving me a set of answers that sort of follow one stream of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll like actually rein it back in and say, that's great. These were all negative. These all went in this particular trajectory. I believe that there's a different trajectory to follow, and I feel like we've left this blank. And so I want to explore this trajectory. Or I'll say, what gap is there that I haven't, what rock have I not looked under? And so I think it does sort of behoove us to remember, like, we have some agency, that we actually need to sort of turn on our thinking caps. It isn't really just outsourcing, right? Because that way it's sort of the augmentation of it as opposed to just sort of the outsourcing of it, which I think I always say we don't have to be the curators of our own misery in this situation, right?
Yeah. I saw someone in the chat ask, do folks find that people trust AI's answers more than your perspective? And we'll talk about bias a little bit in another section, and it's something we go into in depth in our course. But I think what you just brought up, Mina, is you're sort of reflecting an astute practitioner of AI, right? You've practiced the prompting, you've practiced the types of questions that you're asking. And what I would say that you are doing there is you are deploying your bias strategically. And so I think to answer in relation to that question someone asked, I think there is in some cases a perception that AI is less biased. For any of us that know about how LLMs work, we know that's not true. Right. But I think the perspective that I want to share here is that bias is not a problem. It's unintentional or unexamined bias. And what we are actually doing when we're engaging with AI is trying to translate some of our bias onto the model so that it can help us think in the ways that we want to. We might also be asking it to try on a different bias because we want to get out of our default. But thinking about it as sort of biases to try on and take off is actually what you're talking about when you're engaging with, and it makes it a way for us to prototype some of that and see how our biases or the ways in which we are prompting are affecting the outputs by seeing the outputs and then adjusting how we are interacting with the model. So it becomes sort of a research activity in and of itself.
Yeah, that is really fascinating, actually. I want to move on to Quadrant 3. Mm-hmm. This one feels very interesting to me. Using it to challenge your own assumptions, which I actually have done a lot recently. But how do you use it as a thought partner to pressure test your own thinking?
Yeah. So if we started in a mode that was all about using AI to go fast and as big as we can, this is the complete other end of that spectrum. This is about slowing down and introducing meaningful friction into our process. This mode really leverages the dialectical, the reflective nature of AI. And there was a daily episode a couple days ago about how software developers are using AI. And one of the things that emerged was that a lot of them are using it in this way, in the sort of like Socratic dialogue. This is about like pushing and challenging us to consider other perspectives, to introduce new ones. This is where we could think about surfacing our own biases, which are very hard to see because they are the default frame that we see the world through. Here we might be thinking about how we're using AI to critique our thinking or challenge our assumptions. And for anyone that's ever been lucky enough to work on an interdisciplinary design team, you probably know how good it feels to be in thought partnership with other perspectives during research. It's actually a fundamental principle of how we design and do research at IDEO because we believe in the power of multiple perspectives. And I would argue that interdisciplinarity does not exist without bias because interdisciplinarity is by nature me coming with my bias, you coming with your bias, someone else coming with their bias, and us surfacing that and having a conversation around that to decide what bias we want to apply to our research and our design. So if we're thinking about sort of the moments in the design process this might be relevant to, of course, it is helpful for interrogating what you found in research, for pushing your insights further, for critiquing your opportunity framing, for identifying levers of iteration and improvement. But my favorite way to use this mode is as we sort of just started talking about, is right at the beginning of research when I want to understand and examine my positionality to a problem space, when I want to examine my bias and understand the point of view I am bringing and what then I might be primed to listen for and the meaning I might be primed to make so that I can then design a research plan that complements that bias. So I am not here talking about the bias of large language models. That is a topic for Angela and something we get into in depth in some of the course content. But here I am talking about our bias as designers and how we are using AI to examine our bias so that we can operate from a place of awareness and intention rather than unintentionally designing for ourselves or what we think is important. So you might use this mode to critique your recruiting plan, right, for missing perspectives, given the bias that you bring to the problem, or your discussion guides, right? How do you ask better questions, less leading, easier to answer. And then, of course, you might critique the outputs of your synthesis, right? How could you make your insights and opportunities more robust, but also what might be embedded in those insights and opportunities that you might not be able to see. This is particularly important for researchers that are working alone, right? Because it is very hard in the container of our own brain to do this. No matter how intentional we think we are or want to be. And so it really is the thought partnership, the reflective nature of AI that allows us to ask questions and then have questions asked back of us. Again, I think chat-based interactions are really nice because as we've talked about, this is a back and forth, this is a dialogue. And we'll get into in the course some specific prompting of how you can facilitate this exercise at the beginning of a research process. But you could build any number of evaluation frameworks into a conversational AI to provide meaningful critique along the process, from evaluating your insights against your initial question set, right? Like how well is what you've generated answering the question you set out to answer, or evaluating your opportunities against viability and feasibility considerations. So how does what you've designed or your design strategy map to the thing that you're trying to do? Or, of course, you could evaluate some design solutions against a competitive landscape or ecosystem enablers, asking AI to engage you in conversation and thought-provoking critique around sort of big questions that are embedded in your research and your design. I think, I think this is one that really hammers home the idea of it's not just about speed, right? It is not just
Right.
about going faster. It's about using AI to get to new types of questions, both bigger, right, and more granular and more iterative, which allows us to engage with complexity in new ways. I think the other thing that is really evident as we think about this mode of engaging with AI is that as AI automates creation or generation, the altitude of our role as researchers can evolve. We can spend more time in thoughtful, bias-informed problem framing. We can be more critical and iterative in how we're asking questions and framing and reframing them. And I think this dialectical nature of AI also forces us to make explicit things that are implicit for us. And that is part of bias checking, right? Having to be explicit about things that you don't define for yourself because they are so automated. The benefit of that is, yes, it makes for more bias-informed problem framing, but also makes you better at collaborating with other people, inviting other people into your thinking, whether they are human or AI.
Yeah. This one's really interesting for me, I think, because especially if you like, I do a lot of solo work at times, like it ebbs and flows. And and just that introduction of friction, we're big fans of it at IDEO, right? Like we really do think that there is a kind of productive friction.
Yeah.
And that idea of, I think one of the big challenges with AI is that people focus so much on speed and they do it at the expense of productive friction. The speed removes so much of it. And actually it's in the friction that contemplation happens.
Yeah.
That you really consider, the value of one interview over another, or an insight that maybe you hadn't considered before, the time that it might take you to really analyze something and see like what the there actually is. And so this quadrant I find really meaningful in a way because I don't think it's instinctively where people think they can go with AI, but I think it's one of the more valuable tools in the kit, so to speak.
Yeah. And to make a connection to more sort of what might be considered mainstream design research, IDEO talks a lot about the power of analogous research. And I know other people in the world talk about this as well. Analogous research is meaningful friction, right? We are saying for a moment, we are going to step outside answering this direct question to look at it from a different angle. And if you think about engaging AI that way, right? What are the analogs I'm not thinking? What are the perspectives or reframes or shifts that I could be making to round out my understanding of a problem or round out my iteration of a solution? We can use AI like that, and I think it's a mode that many researchers are comfortable in, but it is not a mode that we think about AI being able to support.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, we should go on to the next quadrant. It is really about bringing things to life so you can actually interrogate or test them. And so, what does that look like to use AI to immerse yourself in the data or simulate scenarios?
Yeah. So if we talk about AI expanding what research can be, I think this is the quadrant that really starts to blur the boundaries between research and design. Because here we're really leveraging the generative capabilities of AI to quickly play out our questions, hunches, or ideas, follow things to their logical conclusion by concretizing them. While there are certainly moments that we might be doing that to generate something to use for research, right? We might be using AI to illustrate sacrificial concepts that we then put in front of a participant. That's not exactly what I'm talking about here, because that's really AI in service of design and service of research. But if we think about AI in service of research here, using this generative capacity to concretize thinking actually helps us get our thinking out of our heads so that we can engage with it or invite other people to engage with it.
Right.
So this might have a prototyping role, right? So as a way to prototype our thinking, not generate prototypes of the solution, but prototype our thinking, we might want to make sure that our research questions are robust enough. So we ask an AI to review our design brief and our research question and generate a set of recruiting profiles and a research plan. Then we might look at that recruiting profile and research plan, not to say, here's the plan, but to say, based on this output, what is missing from my thinking, right? What perspectives are missing? What questions aren't being addressed appropriately? Because that might be evidence for us that we need to flesh that thinking out a bit more. Because again, we have to make this explicit, right? We're having to do this exercise of making all of this thinking that we hold in our head explicit for an AI. And that forces us to be in dialogue with stuff, and then gives us concrete evidence about how robust or developed our thinking is. So this is really a way to use AI's generative capacity to generate an artifact, and then evaluate that artifact as a way to evaluate the thinking that went into it. Another example might be you're in sort of a design strategy moment, and you want to play out how investment in one strategic opportunity that you defined might influence future business performance or customer satisfaction, to assess the soundness of the thinking in your strategy. So you might use AI to do kind of like a light design futuring exercise, playing out different future scenarios against different strategic investments so that you can stretch the time horizon of your strategy and ensure that that strategy is resilient or future fit. Again, you're not generating those future scenarios as an artifact to put forward in your strategy, but as a way to test the resilience of the strategy, of the strategic thinking that you've been doing. The other place that this mode can be really helpful is in communication. And the same principles are at play here, right? It's about how do we externalize our thinking, concretize our thinking, so that in the first case, it's so that we can engage with it. In this second mode, it's about how someone else could engage with it, how we could start to share our findings in a way that someone else can then engage with them. I'm not going to go into too much detail about storytelling, about how we use AI to generate stories and tell stories. But here the point is around playing with format and channel.
All right.
To communicate. So, for example, maybe we want to turn our research insight into storyboards, right? So that someone can imagine how they play out across a real human's life. Or maybe we have a couple of different stakeholders that need to engage with our research findings, one of which just needs sort of like an executive summary level. So we use AI tools to turn our research report into a podcast that a busy executive could listen to on their commute, right? Form for function. Maybe we're using Claude Code to build a website so that people can interact with and navigate our research findings on their own. Or my favorite use case is maybe we want to build our research into a brain that someone could query. So we know that our design team is going to be building features and functions based on our research. And that might take 3 months, right? Long after our final presentation. So we train a custom agent on our research findings, and then the design team can actually query that research when they're designing a new feature or product. They could also ask the research to critique the product based on what's in the research. So here you're thinking about building like a living, breathing research brain that has use far beyond your handing it off. And as I said, here we're blurring the boundaries between research and design. We're generating in service of prototyping, but also in service of communicating. And I think those are things that we often think of as a designer's job or part of the design process, right? The concretization, the communication. AI both gives us new capabilities, makes it easier for folks that are not trained in those design modes to do that. And also the process of engaging with AI itself asks that of us, asks us to toggle between those research and design modes more fluently. So, this exists on the speed, on the fast end of the speed axis, because we are really leveraging the generative capacity of AI to build things out quickly. But it's speed in service of understanding, not speed for efficiency's sake.
Right.
We're using AI to concretize thinking so that we can see it more deeply and we can share it more resonantly.
Yeah, and that last example that you had, there are very simple ways to do that too. I mean, you can make something that does sort of have like the UI of a brain and all of those things, but even, we use all the tools, right? Like we experiment with all of the tools at IDEO. But even in its most simple state, you could create a notebook LM that pulls very specifically from a set of documents that someone can just query. And you've controlled the data set that it's using, so you don't have to worry so much of what it's pulling from. That gives people a quick way to get to the answers in your data set that you've created. So thinking about the right tool and the
Yeah.
right level of fidelity for the problem you're trying to solve can become a lot easier when you become familiar with lots of different tools. So
Yeah.
I do love that. I love the kind of it's very user centered, really understanding who your audience is, what time they have to give to it, the level of altitude they need to kind of have information at can be really
Yeah.
helpful in this regard.
I think Notebook LM is a good example of a tool here because it affords so many different modes of output, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you really allow someone
Yeah.
to engage with your data set in a way that they want to, right? Is it a podcast? Is it a deck? Is it
Mm-hmm.
a tree diagram, right?
Right.
So that sort of ability to transmute content is really a superpower of AI, both in terms of analyzing data, but also in terms of sharing and reporting it out.
So, if you kind of had to sum up the whole four quadrant framework, how might you do that for everybody?
Um, I would say that the framework is about describing how and where AI can expand our research capabilities, not replace them, but augment them. Leveraging speed and scale,
Mm-hmm.
the key things that AI affords at the most fundamental level, but that it is about recognizing that speed and scale are only interesting if used intentionally. And it is the intersection of those two things and the way we think about the interplay between them that starts to unlock strategic use cases for AI, not just efficient use cases for AI. AI certainly can sharpen our thinking, but it's not. We're not intending to say that it's going to replace it. We are still thinking with our brains, but we are potentially moving the value of human thinking upstream as AI automates a little bit more of the creation part of our role, allowing us to think a little bit more about problem framing, which is, in my mind, the fundamental skill of a researcher. It is
Absolutely.
also, interestingly, the fundamental skill of engaging with AI. So I think we as researchers are really well primed to be good prompt engineers. And I think I have talked about it as modes, though I don't love the word, as I said, because I think moments and methods are interchangeable, right? And you all are the ones that are going to know how those modes could come to life within your process and your organizations better than me. And what I was hoping to create is a sort of philosophical framework that then could have an applied layer to top of it that each practitioner is creating for themselves. And my intention is that it is empowering, right? It is a reminder that there are not really defined rules quite yet about how and where AI should be used in research. And I'm proposing for modes for you all to play with and experiment with. And I hope to be in conversation with you all via the beautiful thing that is the internet about how you might be applying or thinking about some of what we just walked through.
Yeah, I normally this is where I would do key takeaways before we go to live audience Q&A, but you've done an excellent job of them. The only one that I will add that you made a point of at the top of the show is that we're writing the rules in real time, which I know can be overwhelming, but I find that to be one of the most empowering and amazing things because there aren't a lot of moments in history when you get to do that.
Totally.
And this group here, this group of people are the group of people who get to decide some of these rules. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of amazing.
Yeah.
So, on that note, we actually have a lot of questions. And what I will say is that we'll do one or two with Hannah now. And Hannah mentioned her colleague Angela, who is actually going to do an asked and answered, a Q&A episode where we will answer a lot of your questions. So keep dropping them into the chat. Don't worry if we get to them or not today, but we will take a whole bunch of them and do another episode as a follow-up. So I'm not going to take these in any particular order. But, and I apologize if I get names wrong. Niyati asks, what practices help us move from AI generated insights to meaningful human centered decisions?
So I think, again, I will reiterate that when we at IDEO use the term insight, we mean something very specific, right? And it is the result of human sense making. So I'm going to interpret that question as once we've sort of defined for ourselves what is meaningful in a data set, what are the key insights, how do we then move to generating or move to making human-centered decisions? That is sort of what we might call like design strategy, which is often the deliverable of a researcher, right? It's sort of moving from human-centered research into research-informed design. Right. I think this is a moment where that top right quadrant, right, the generative potential of AI might come into play, right? So we have a set of insights, we have a brief or a framing, and now we want to start generating some prototypes, right? Like given this as our design strategy, right, this set of insights or maybe opportunities as our strategy, what could that look like in terms of solution? And again, that's not to say that we are then using those solutions as solutions, but we are using them as jumping off points for design. Mm-hmm. And we are also, in some cases, evaluating those solution-like things, solutionoids, to assess how actionable our strategy is. Because as a researcher, your design strategy is only as good as it is actionable for design. And so right. that ability for AI to allow you to move really seamlessly between research and design helps you pressure test how actionable is your strategy, how designable is your strategy for a design team or a designer, and then can give you some cues or jumping off points to start informing design solutions.
Great. Whitney has a really interesting question, actually. Do you feel that AI can turn a non-researcher into a serious researcher? Ooh. For example, I've forgotten my grad school statistics, but I'm creating a research agent. Statistical analysis could be helpful in my project. I'm not sure which direction to go with it. The agent I built makes suggestions, but can I trust them?
Well, I might challenge the framing of a serious researcher, right? I think researchers are curious question askers, and some of the methods that researchers use are harder, like statistical analysis, than others. And I think AI is great for complementing the sort of hard skills that you might not have, right? Statistics being one of them, because AI is great at math, at calculation, right? Like this is one of the things that it is actually excellent at. I mean, I do think you have the question of whether or not it's trustworthy. I might suggest that you look to the world of software development, because software developers have really incredible workflows where they have sort of like fleets of agents deployed, right? Where one agent is doing something like statistical analysis and another agent is reviewing that statistical analysis for errors. And then another agent is reviewing that analysis and sort of compiling a list of things that a software developer might need to do to change the code. And to me, that's a really good analog for what it might look like for you to be outsourcing sort of these hard statistical skills to an agent in a way that is robust and resilient.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting analog, actually. I like that one. All right, Hannah, we're going to move on to our lightning round, which is
Okay.
something that we've been doing with all of our, I should have warned you ahead of time, I'm sorry, with all of our guests more recently. And so we're just going to jump into it. Don't overthink it. This is really
Okay.
actually meant to be super fun. What book, TV show, or movie would you recommend to our listeners?
I'm going to go podcast.
Okay,
I'm breaking the rules already.
that's all
Um,
right. We're rewriting
I
the rule book.
We're
That's what
rewriting
we're
the rules.
doing.
I love On Being. It's a
Okay.
podcast that's hosted by this journalist named Krista Tippett, and she hosts conversations with all sorts of fascinating people on what she defines as the human condition. And I love it. I mean, the conversations that they have are fascinating, but I think she is an incredible interviewer. And I think she is excellent at asking questions that are both sort of directional and provide guidance to her guest, but are also opening and expansive. And I think, as I grapple with my role within an AI mediated era, I really think asking good questions is the skill that I most need to keep sharp. And so I am
Yeah.
always looking for inspiration from people who ask good questions.
Love it. I'm going to add that to my list. Who's a creative thinker you look up to?
I'm going to break the rules again a little bit. The news is a really hard place to be right now, but I've been listening to a lot of Ezra Klein. And I think there is no creative pursuit more worthy right now than architecting a measured conversation about an explosive situation.
Yeah.
And I just think he does a great job of using the art of conversation and debate and storytelling to architect like what feels to me like a truly balanced perspective on so many things.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I've been a listener since he was at Vox and since I was at The
Yeah.
Economist, and I'm
Yeah.
a big fan.
Yeah.
What's a skill you're currently working on?
I am studying to become a functional nutrition counselor, which I am learning is just design research skills applied to the system, the complexity of the human body, and then thinking about how we respectfully and nourishingly use food as a medium to intervene upon it.
We're going to have to talk about this
Yeah,
when I'm
I
in
would love
Cambridge
to.
next week. That's
Yes.
amazing. Okay.
Sounds great.
What's a skill you're proud of?
I'm a really good cook, which I think is part of this desire, and I think I'm a pretty good host. And I love throwing a dinner party. I just started hosting a dinner party series called Perpetual Stew, which is
Really?
kind of bringing together all these things. It's food and community and question asking.
I smell a podcast.
Ugh.
I would totally. I want to be at one of these.
Does it smell like stew?
You know what? I love a good stew. What's a mistake you have learned from?
I am really motivated by completion, like checking something off a box. And
I know where this is going.
that can prompt some really rushed decision, impulsive decisions. So I've definitely learned from many a mistake of moving too fast in pursuit of that dopamine rush of completing something.
I hear that. Yeah. What's a philosophy that you live by?
Fewer things.
In so many ways.
So in all the ways.
And what advice would you give to your younger self?
Do fewer things.
I could be giving that advice to my now self.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that was great. If today's conversation resonated with all of you and you want to go deeper on this topic, Hannah is one of the instructors in our new course, as we've mentioned, Human-Centered Research with AI, where you'll learn to apply these ideas in your own work. The very first cohort starts on May 21st. You can find more details, of course, at IDEOU.com. And a reminder that we'll be releasing this episode and our listener Q&A episode with our other course instructor, Angela Kochaska, in the coming weeks. I also saw many of you wanting to connect with each other. A great way to do that is through IDEOU on LinkedIn. So we'll drop a link in the chat where you can share your top takeaways from today's episode, and also just connect with each other and share ideas. And if you enjoyed this particular conversation, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. And we're always trying to grow our listenership. So if you have a friend or colleague who's not yet joined us, drop them a link because we would love to be a source of inspiration to them. Thanks for joining us today, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all and our audience for being here with us, for your questions, and for being part of this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Creative Confidence.